My name is Sari van Poelje. I'm the owner of Intact Academy and Team Agility. In Intact Academy, we organize training programs for people who want to start learning to coach up until team coach and organizational consultant. There are team coaching training programs everywhere. You can find them on intactacademy.com. With Team Agility, I'm specialized in business innovation design. So I help businesses innovate more quickly than their products so that they're always on time to market. We're recording a series of videos to teach you something about transactional analysis. TA is something we use in executive coaching and team coaching all the time because it's simple, easy to understand, and easy to transfer. Clients love it. So in this series, we've been talking lately about ego states, transactions, games, rackets. And this time I want to talk to you about how to get out of conflict or how to get out of psychological games. Once you see this video and you like it, please share it. These videos are really for the public domain, and we'd love to influence the quality of life of other people as well. So if you have friends or family or colleagues who would benefit from these videos, please share them. Last time we talked about the Formula G, the game formula Byrne created. And really Formula G explains how you get into conflict. Every conflict follows the same steps. You have stress, you have ulterior transactions, you have a moment of cross-up, we call it, where the monkey comes out of the sleeve, we say in Dutch. And then most people end their conflicts in payoff. So your favorite rotten feeling linked to your basic assumptions about yourself, others, and life. If you're interested in that, see the previous video. This time we're going to talk about how to get out of conflict or how to get out of games. And we're going to use some principles for that. One is we're going to look at why do people play games, and are there ways to diminish your possibility of getting into games. The second thing is we're going to use Formula G to look at each step to see if there's an option. We love options in TA. Steve Karpman wrote a fantastic article called Options. If you want to know more, read that article. The third way we get out of games is to look at, can we switch roles? And that's the subject of the next blog. First of all, why do people play games in the first place? Well, Byrne said there were 6 advantages to playing games. And if we invert those, this is actually a formula how to get out of games as well. So Byrne said we play games and we get into conflict because it really is a way to get a lot of recognition and attention. So anytime we're in conflict, it feels like you're the only 2 people or 3 people or 4 people on the planet engaged in this really intense conversation and this really intense fight. So it's a source of what we call strokes, of recognition. And in our lives, negative recognition is better than no recognition at all. So if people can't get positive recognition, they go for the negative ones and get into conflict, because at least in conflicts, you're sure that people know who you are. So one of the tricks about staying out of games, this is the moment of stress, remember, that we started with in the game formula, is to really make sure you've got enough recognition in your life. The question for you is, do you have people in your life or colleagues who actually see you, we call that unconditional recognition, or who actually appreciate what you do, we call that conditional recognition. If your tank is full, if you've got a tiger in your tank, as they used to say, if your tank is full, then the chances of getting into conflict are minimized. So your first question is, do I have enough recognition in my life? And if I don't, where could I get that? The myth around that is if you ask for recognition, it's worth less than if you get it spontaneously. Well, I can tell you that's not true. Most people, when they see you, they go, oh, they probably have a good life. I'm not going to tell them extra that I like them. Or for some reason in our society, we've decided that there's not enough recognition to go around, so we'll be giving it out sparingly. But the truth of the matter is, it's very easy to give recognition. You see someone on the bus, they've got a nice sweater on. You go up to them and you say, gosh, I like your sweater, without it meaning anything else except an exchange of compliments. That person's day is better, and so is yours. So, and the chances of diminishing conflict in the world are also there. So, first rule, if you want to stay out of conflict, make sure your level of recognition is high, and that you also give other people recognition for who they are or what they do. Burns said a second reason that people get into conflict is because it confirms the basic assumptions they have about themselves. So last time we talked about that anecdote of people wanting to put out the trash and you ending up talking about your relationship. Oh, if you loved me enough, the trash would have been outside. Well, if you are caught in a loop of really confirming your basic assumptions about yourself, others, and life, then the chances of getting into conflict to reconfirm that are very high. So the trick there is to really be open to finding out and curious to finding out that life is actually different from what you think. And that can be in small things, a random kindness. I'm very up for random kindness. So if people hold open the door for me, I'm really happy about that. If people in restaurants go, I'll give you an extra drink, wonderful. You know, if people do random kindness things in the world, it would be a less conflictuous place. So, but this only happens if you're curious and open to life being different than you think it is. And some people go around life wanting to reconfirm, I don't know, nobody loves me, or the world is a difficult place, or see, it always happens to me. What would life be for you if you decided that, yes, maybe it was like that one time, but you're open to something else? So that's the question for you. Are you open to life being different, to being surprised about what life can bring? If that's true, the chances of getting into conflict are much lower. The third reason Burns said we got into conflict a lot is because it gives us an external social advantage. And what he meant by that is sometimes people get bored. And when they're bored, they're looking for a degree of stimulus they don't have anyway. So what do? Well, intimacy is one source of stimulus, but people think it's scarce, which is not true, but we'll talk about that another time. So what they do is they start a fight. You can see that in kids, you know, they're bored out of their minds. What they do is they escalate until you start to fight with them, because that's a way to relieve boredom and to get their little social advantage of passing time. And to be honest, I've worked in teams. I'm often called into teams where they've had 6 managers and they don't have enough to do. The myth is that people need to reduce work pressure when they're under conflict. Well, I'll give you a new aspect to this. I think actually, if you up the ante, so if you really pose a new purpose and a new challenge for a team, they might have to work harder and get into conflict less, because then they have a shared purpose, they have something to do, they get stimulated by that in a good way, and they'll have less time to get into conflict. That's also, you know, if people get into conflict to relieve boredom, the thing to do is to up their performance, not make less demands on them. So that's the third thing. The fourth reason people get into games, according to Byrne, is because it gives a sense of pseudo-intimacy. I already said that, you know, when you're in a conflict with someone, it feels like you're the only 2 people in the world. Everything else disappears. And suddenly, you know, you're completely focused on this person. Your brain shuts down. You only see one thing. And this, again, you know, it's better to have pseudo-intimacy than no intimacy at all in your life. So people replay old relationships. Really, they're over it, but you know, you replay old relationships. So during a conflict, your top dog or your victim or your rescuer, we'll talk about that later. But you just replay that. And every time you get into a conflict and you replay those roles, you go, see, the world is like that. You know, this is what my life is. The great thing about being an adult is there are no rules. You can make any life you want to. And one of the decisions you can take is, I'm not going to go for pseudo intimacy anymore. I want real intimacy. So the other way to get out of games is to really make sure that you have a couple of really close relationships in your life, because the nourishment you get from that will help you diminish your hunger for conflict. As you can see, I don't see conflict as a negative thing. I just see it, you can have positive conflict, which, you know, 1 and 1 is more than 2. But often a psychological game is a non-problem solving pattern of behavior, which means that you loop. It's a looping behavior where you do the same thing over and over again. And the reason for that is, you know, one of the reasons for that is that you don't have enough intimacy in your life. And this pseudo intimacy where you feel really close because you're in conflict. Just think about it. The people you hate are actually people you feel very close to. In a bad way, but you feel very close to them. And so if you could turn that into compassion or into a link, it's funny because one of the people I've had friction with for 20 years, we just met. I called him up and I said, I don't even remember why we're in conflict. Can we have a cup of coffee? And we started to talk, and it, you know, we got into conflict because we're very close. We share values. Now he's my best buddy. We're going to work together. It's fantastic. Yeah. So my invitation to you is, if you're in conflict a lot, look for those moments of pseudo intimacy that you can switch into moments of real intimacy. The other reason people get into games, psychological games, is because they want to avoid solving their problems. This sounds really psychological, but it's a way to avoid situations that challenge your frame of reference. Every time someone offers you a hand and you go, oh no, my life is not like that, and you start a conflict about it. Why did you give me your hand? Why did you do it now? Oh, you're too close. It's a way to recapture that frame of reference that you have, your belief about yourself, others, and life. And again, you know, what really helps in those situations is that you are open to being surprised. Yeah. And sometimes life is different than you thought it was. I understand there's a biological need. There's almost a biological need to maintain status quo in your life because it's predictable, and anything that's predictable costs you less energy. But being predictable when it's good is a very different story from being predictable when it's bad. And if you want predictability because life is bad, then it's really time to recalculate and rethink your frame of reference. Is this really true? The truth of the matter is, yes, maybe your life has been like that. And maybe there have been events in which you've experienced that life is, is difficult. Or maybe you've experienced that people have betrayed you or done things that have gone over your boundaries. Or maybe you have experienced moments where you thought, oh, I'm not competent, or am I good enough? And the truth of the matter is, every day is a new day. And every day you can rethink, what frame of reference do I have? So that's my challenge to you. If you want to reduce conflict in your life, be prepared to challenge your own frame of reference. Take a piece of paper, write down, what do I think? If in my unprotected moments, in the darkest time of night, what do I believe about myself, others, and life? And am I prepared to let that go? And what would happen if I would let that go? What will life be like? The last reason that Byrne said we got into conflict is quite psychological. He called it the internal psychological advantage. And he said, sometimes it's easier to create pain in the here and now than to feel the pain that you had before. Just sounds a bit strange, but sometimes people, you see, if you create pain in the here and now, you're in control. And when you were young, you weren't. You were dependent. And you had no control about the pain you got. And all of us, no matter how good our pasts are, no matter how wonderful our parents were, we've had moments where we've lost contact with self and others. We call that, small trauma. And so you've experienced pain. All of us have. But sometimes that pain is so severe that a child certainly decides that they rather have control of the pain. And so what they do is they create situations in which they create pain, because then they are the locus of control. And that's much, much easier than to feel that you're powerless or impotent or not in control. And so sometimes what people do when they create conflict is they create something that they have control over. And that's easier than feeling pain out of control. So some people come to me and they say, they're in a not so good marriage, and they relive conflict all over again. And when I talk to them, they tell me, I ask them sometimes, how did you grow up? And they said, oh, my parents had a bad marriage as well. I'm not saying that's always true, but I'm saying sometimes that happens. And as a child, when you experience that, it's easier to create a fight than to feel the depressive state that goes with a bad relationship. That's also the case. When you change, when you're nearing change, it's really weird. So you're in this state of life, and to really change, you have to go into what we call a depressive state, when you relive the pain. And some people don't want to do that. So what they do is they create conflict before they can feel that depressive state. But if you don't feel that depressive state about what you missed and what the hurt was, you can never change. But some people don't like that, so they stay in that period before. That's what Byrne meant by the internal psychological advantage. So the thing for you is, if you want to reduce conflict, my question to you is, do you accept that sometimes you feel that pain and that it's okay? Embrace it. Embrace that. Because if you don't embrace that, it's also part of you. If you don't embrace that, it's really, really hard to open your frame of reference to not being in conflict. So to summarize, Byrne said there are 6 advantages to being into conflict. One is the internal psychological advantage, which means that it's easier to create pain in the here and now. The second is the external psychological advantage, which means that you avoid situations that challenge your frame of reference. The third is the internal social advantage, where you have pseudo intimacy, which is better than no intimacy at all. External social advantage, where you pass time because you're bored. You don't have enough structure in your life, you create a conflict. That'll give you structure. Biological advantage, it's a source of recognition. Negative recognition is better than no recognition at all. And the last advantage, he said, of conflict is the existential advantage, where you confirm your frame of reference, your belief about self, others, and the world. And I've given you in this talk some ways to get out of that, and I hope you'll use it to your advantage.